for school committee or planning board? Just down the hall.
They're down the hall.
You'd figure it out eventually.
We're gonna be a better meeting though.
Ready?
Yeah. Thanks.
Recording in progress.
All right. The time is 7 o'clock, so I'm going to call the Sutton Public Schools Committee meeting to order. Pursuant to Governor Healy's March 29th, 2023 order extending the temporary provision to the open meeting law until March 31st, 2025, this meeting of the school committee is in a hybrid format and is being recorded. The meeting will be broadcast and recorded on local public access station on the Education Channel and live streamed on the town's YouTube channel when available. A recording of the meeting will be available on the town's website and YouTube channel. The school committee meeting has been called to order. Each member should state their name and whether they're attending in person or remotely.
Jennifer Darling, in person.
Nate Jerome, in person.
Ben Gibbons in person.
Paul Brennan, in person.
Bruce Edwards, remote.
Thank you. All right, first agenda item is the Pledge of Allegiance, so please stand.
Pledge of allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. All right, we'll move it to the public forum. Yeah. Just make sure to state your name and address, please.
My name is James Ahern, 15 Wachusett Drive, here in town. I just have a couple questions from the last meeting that was held at the middle school auditorium that I don't believe were answered. As you know, it was a full house, and the questions that I don't believe were answered were, is the Connections Conference going to be held on campus next year? Principal McCarthy, in his letter that I had previously read, said that it would potentially be moved off campus. Since there were representatives from, if I heard him right, 57 towns throughout New England and 600 attendees, he mentioned that the school was getting too small for it. But besides that, I have other concerns. I believe that Mr. McCarthy thought the major problem was the drag queen, and that's what had the town all up in arms. I believe that there was more of a problem than just the drag queen. And, you know, addressing the drag queen is fine, but I think that, you know, there were other problems, excuse me, that occurred at the Con. And number one is, how much, you know, if we're gonna put on an event of that size with 600 attendees from 57 towns, how much time is really spent by the principal and the teachers to put that thing on? Okay, he says that he didn't spend any time on it, and the teachers didn't spend any time on it. Well, that seems highly unlikely. I believe that the Connections Conference should be independent of the town. I don't believe the town should have anything to do with it. And for him to think that the town should be the leader in this, I think is wrong. I think we should be teaching a curriculum that is, you know, the ABCs, math, English, science, geography, things along those lines. Someone corrected me when I said at the last meeting that the LGBTQ represented 1% of the community. Well, I stand corrected. I went home and checked it out, and yes, it probably does represent as much as 5%. Okay? I don't believe that 5% of the LGBTQ community should be running the town. 95% of the town is not of that persuasion. And as I said at the last meeting, whatever anybody does or whatever their persuasion is, that's fine with me. But I don't want Sutton, which is a moderately conservative town, to be known as the LGBTQ center of New England. And I don't think this particular conference is appropriate for the town. So if you as a school community could take that into consideration and give an answer, because I know I'm not the only one in town who is very concerned about this conference being held in town and to move it out of town, and the amount of time that is dedicated on this project by our administrators and by our faculty members. I think it would be greatly advantageous to the town if we concentrated on education and not LGBTQ. And my other thing is, we don't need to be advertising for Worcester Pride in town. At the first meeting I attended that was supposed to be here at Town Hall, I saw the whole Worcester Pride represented downstairs here in Town Hall, outside with all the flags going and everything. And if it's true we had 600 attendees last year, next year it's gonna be more. That's for sure, just by word of mouth. These things spread, they mushroom, they grow legs, pick any phrase you want. But as a resident of Sutton for 35 years, taxpayer for over 70, I don't think it has any place in town. Thank you for hearing me.
Thank you. Thanks for bringing those questions and concerns to the committee during public forum.
And when can we expect a response
So-
on that?
Yep, so we can't answer them tonight because it's public forum. So public forum is designed for you to express your concerns and opinions to the committee, but we can't answer them. So if you want to send me an email, I can look and work for answers, but I can't respond directly to you in public forum. That'd be a violation of open meeting law. Anyone else have anything they want to address to public forum tonight?
Excuse me. Do you want me to send you an email on
Sure.
that?
Then I can have your contact information. That'd be great.
No, but I mean, just what I said. If I don't send you an email, is that something you can address?
If you can just send me your contact information, then I can reach out to you, yeah. But I can't,
will
I can't
send
answer
you
the questions
Your,
here.
my contact information, I can give it to you right now, if you want to write it down.
Chris will take it. Thanks, Chris.
Okay. Right now? Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Right, I don't see anyone online either. Okay. All right, let's move to the consent agenda then for this evening.
I move to approve the consent agenda as presented.
Thank you. Second.
Second?
Okay, it's been first and seconded. Any discussion or questions on the consent agenda?
I don't know that it needs to be changed. There was one thing in there that I was chairing that meeting, and it just said I would follow up with council, but I don't think that's exactly what I said. It was more, we'll have the chair follow up with council, but I think you've already followed up with Desi and council, so it's minor. I just
Yep.
hope nobody's looking forward to me getting back from council, so.
Can we just make that amendment?
Yeah, but other than that, yeah.
Anyone else?
That's a friendly amendment. We won't vote that, right? We'll stick on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm fine with that as long as everyone else is okay with that. Okay. And I'll be abstaining because I wasn't here. So I did watch, but I wasn't in the meeting, so I'll abstain from our vote. Okay, sounds like we're good. So we'll need a vote, starting with you, Jen.
Darling, aye.
Jerome, I.
Gibbons abstain.
Brennan, aye.
Edwards, aye, but it's really difficult to hear anything.
Thanks, Bruce. We'll try and speak up then. Motion passes 4-0 with one abstaining. Okay. We'll move to the education update then, starting with special education. Thanks, Jessica.
All right, good evening, everyone.
So I'm really excited to start off with sharing that tomorrow we are hosting a special education resource fair at the middle school, high school, in order to introduce parents to the new IEP form. Prior to that, we are welcoming, I believe we're up to 10 to 12 vendors from across the area that will be sharing information with families about how their agencies can support families. We have the Department of Developmental Services, the Department of Mental Health, a variety of counseling, ABA services in the area coming to host tables so that families can gather resources from 6 to 7. And then from 7 to 8, myself and the 2 other team chairs will be showing the families about the new IEP form and just what it will look like in comparison to the previous state IEP form and what families can expect going into next year. So we're excited to host that and hope that any family in the community would like to come. It's not just for special education families. At least the first part. The second part, is more directed towards families of students with IEPs, but everybody is welcome to come and learn. So again, from 6 to 8 tomorrow night, come to the middle school, high school cafeteria and get some local resources. I'm also happy to share that last week we were awarded one of 19 grants for the state for reducing the use of our timeout rooms. So schools have to look at supporting students in the least restrictive environment, supporting them in general education, not excluding them from students. And we put in for a grant in the end of February. 69 districts applied. We were one of 19 to receive $75,000 to work on looking at our data, building committees to look at our data, review the use of primarily our 2 supportive protective areas, or SPAs as they're called in the ELC and elementary, and reducing those, as well as increasing some instructional assistant positions to support in the middle high school for the transition room and support with the BCBAs in the lower school in responding to student needs and training staff on de-escalation. So that is something that we're looking forward to putting in place next year, along with the creation of 2 calming corners or sensory spaces in the elementary and ELC that students can use before accessing something like a timeout room, so a calming area that they can access. So that was awarded last week. And we have begun our training for the new IEP. Staff actually come Wednesday for our first after-school training to learn about the sections of the IEP that will be impacted by the new regulation that we're no longer writing what they used to call the PLEPs, which is just a list of accommodations and supports, but we're looking at the present level of performance and writing more narratives based on what students can do and what supports they need. So staff will begin that training this week. We have trained all educational staff from the ELC to the high school on the new form. All general ed teachers, music, gym, all teachers have seen it and have had exposure to that, and we will begin some more diving into that training this upcoming summer. And we are purchasing a contract with Goalbook. It is a nationally used web-based service for staff to look at their goals related to students' IEP, looking at standards and frameworks and making sure students are achieving grade level standards, but with the support they need. So if they need it with 2 or more prompts, but more structured support related to the frameworks, so teachers don't have to dig and kind of make up goals that they support, more standards-based. And lastly, we have started a group of 15 staff members in the ELC and elementary school to work on our multi-tiered system of support and creating protocols and procedures for supporting students across the 2 schools and following a framework of how to support students, what teachers should look for, what can they access, and if they refer a student to the student support team, which is a multidisciplinary team that looks at supporting students across the board. What's the paperwork look like? Who do they respond to in creating systemic change in that area?
Thank you. Anyone have any questions or comments for Jessica?
No, that sounds great. I really appreciate that. It sounds like you're getting the whole team together and everybody educated up on the latest and greatest, so that's excellent. Thank you.
You're welcome.
When was the last time the IEP format was modified or adjusted?
Believe it's 16 years ago. We
Okay,
haven't
so-
had an updated state form, and this is the first time that every district will be using the same form. So previously, there was components that every district had to have, but now we're mandated by a specific form. And so it will look the same, which is very beneficial. So if a kid comes to us from Sudbury, it will look exactly the same, whereas prior, we were trying to convert it or make it fit into ours and having to rewrite it, and we won't have to do that.
Long time coming.
Yes.
It's great. Any changes dramatically one way or the other, what you foresee for special ed requirements next year?
In terms of staffing,
Well, I was thinking in terms of students with need and it's sort of fitting within the budget we have right now.
so we are working hard to stay within, what we have outlined in terms of our budget. There's always that one unexpected expense, but as a leadership team, we are trying to really work together to ensure that we can meet students' needs and support. And I think Caitlin and I will talk about that a little next.
And, I neglected to say, again, congratulations and appreciate all the work on that grant. That's tremendous. It's always great to get that level of support. And also, I won't be able to make it tomorrow night, but I think that's a fantastic offering. A lot of times people have questions, and it's the perfect time to do it, 16 years. So, this is great. So really appreciate you doing that as well and leading that up. Thank you.
You're here, and a competitive grant, right?
Yep.
You hear about
Absolutely.
grants where everybody's, this is clearly a competitive grant, so that's great.
Yeah. Thank you very much. It's always good, I think, to hear from some of the departments where, unless you're in it or you have a student in it, you might not know what's going on, but a lot of work happens behind the scenes. So thanks for you and your team for supporting all of our students in the best way that we can. So,
Of course, my pleasure.
Does Bruce?
Bruce, do you have any questions for Jessica?
No, I'm still having a hard time hearing.
Okay. All right. Just raise your hand or something if you need us, Bruce. We'll try and speak directly into the mics and be as loud as we can. Well, normally I would say thanks, Jessica. We'll move you, but I guess you can stay there. Caitlin, if you want to come up and we can then move on to the district curriculum accommodation plan or a DCAP. Let's stick to DCAP because I'm going to butcher one of those words if I have to say it again. So
Yeah, we refer to it as the
Yeah.
DCAP, so
Okay.
that's good.
please let us know about DCAP.
So we wanted to bring to your attention that we recently developed a district curriculum accommodation plan. So this is something that is required by Mass state law for every district to have. The intention being that if you have one of these in place, you're able to prevent unnecessary referrals to special education. So it came to our attention in speaking with a parent in the district back in the fall that we were not necessarily presenting a DCAP to the community. What was happening was Sutton was creating individual accommodation plans for students, which does not meet the requirements of the regulation. So a group of teachers, clinicians, Jess pretty much spearheaded this whole initiative, created a DCAP for Sutton. So we are required to keep this up on our website. It is required to be accessible to anyone. And basically, it just allows a parent to see all of the best research-based, evidence-based teaching practices that we guarantee students will receive in the general education setting.
And there's no requirement for a student to receive an accommodation from the DCAP. So unlike a 504 and IEP, there is no formalized process that a parent or a student needs to go to. So a teacher can implement these accommodations within the DCAP as they feel necessary. So it gives staff a way to support students. So if a student needs to be closer to the speaker, they can make that happen without seeking a referral and, a formalized plan. These can be put in place. What we've worked on in the ELC and the elementary is teachers will be provided a checklist at the end of the year if they have been using these accommodations to go in the student's record, so that the receiving teacher can just know that these are the practices the student benefits from. And so we've trained the staff across the district in utilizing the DCAP.
Thank you. I'll let anybody else have questions first. I have one off the top of my head, but.
At least one.
Yeah, go ahead.
What, no, not two. Thanks, this is spectacular. It says draft. You don't need our approval to
You
post
don't,
this, right?
but we
You
didn't
can-
want to post it on the website until we had made you aware of it.
Okay. And the second question was, if you put accommodation in a student's record, does that ever leave the record, or I don't know whether there's any requirement or there would be any concern of this was an accommodation made that isn't formal or?
So it wouldn't necessarily leave the record. You would redo the checklist every year because students won't necessarily require all of these accommodations year in and year out. It just might be a certain year that they require that accommodation. One of the things that we do in the class placement process for kids in pre-K to 5 is we actually circle on their class placement card whether they've accessed the DCAP, because then that triggers the general education teacher to go and look in their cumulative file. So it's basically just a record of this worked really well for the student at that point in time, so you should consider moving forward with it, or if the student no longer needs it, you would then remove that from the DCAP. We've also made sure that all teachers know that if they are using these accommodations with students, that they should be making parents aware that these accommodations are being used at parent-teacher conferences at the younger grades is like the perfect time to do that, or via email.
Yeah, which all makes sense. It really was more of it, how do we keep track of that information if it were part of how you might move to an IEP, or if there were discussions around was it appropriate. So I just think we have to be careful about all parties and what.
So this is something that we would try first. So if you're thinking about a multi-tiered system of support, which is the MTSS that Jess was referring to in her presentation, Tier 1 instruction is anything that happens in the general education classroom. Tier 2 is more of a small group type instruction, but that can be delivered by a classroom teacher, it can be delivered by an instructional assistant, it can be delivered by a special educator. And then you move to Tier 3, and Tier 3 is when you have students that are receiving specialized instruction outside of the classroom because they may have a disability. One of the things that we need to consider is at times people were jumping from the need for Tier 1 accommodations straight to Tier 3. And we weren't trying anything in Tier 2. So we need to put those interventions in place before we're then making the request for an evaluation. So we have something called the SST team at the elementary and the lower Simonian Center level. The K-2 team is run by Courtney Bashand, and then the 3 to 5 team is run by me. And this is called your student support team. So if you have a student of concern who might be receiving accommodations from the DCAP, you would then bring that student to the student support team, which has a bunch of teachers, clinicians, related service providers on it, and we put together a game plan as to how we're going to provide intervention for that student, usually over a period of 6 to 8 weeks. And then you come back after 6 to 8 weeks and you either make changes to what the intervention is or the accommodations are and document whether they're working. And then if they're not working, that's when you then might move from Tier 2 to Tier 3 and consider some sort of special education evaluation.
Thanks.
And part of why it says draft is we've asked for we've sent it out to all faculty to share any additional accommodations. So the DCAP is a fluid document, so what we may post after a specific date, we could go back in and adjust if we find more practices that are good Tier 1 instructional practices that we want all teachers to have access to.
So if I'm understanding it correctly, it's essentially making some accommodations more readily available without the formality of having to go to a 504, things that you will find that are just beneficial for many students. And I think that's great, making parents and the students aware and the faculty that this is out there. I think it's tremendous. Thank you. I think it's great.
And something we've heard from a lot of the teachers is that they don't always have that much time to run and find their colleagues if they're struggling with a student. So now we've really combined all of the best practices that all of our teachers are using into one place. So teachers can pull up the DCAP and they can say, oh, my student is struggling with reading. And they can go to the reading section and they can look at all of the possible things that they could put in place for a kid that they might not have thought of before.
Excellent. Thank you.
Do you see any of this impacting current students who are on 504s or IEPs and pulling them off of those? And what do we think the potential ramifications of that could be?
So we have had a few meetings recently where if a student is on a 504, but the accommodations that are written into their 504 are just accommodations that are listed in the DCAP, we truly don't need those students to be on a 504 anymore because we're guaranteeing that we are making those accommodations available to all students in the Sutton community. So if that's the case, they really should not be on a 504 or an IEP.
So once we have this document finalized and published on the website, it could reduce some of the 504s. In terms of the IEPs, it will reduce some of the listed accommodations on IEPs because students have access to those at all times. It won't change IEPs because those are specially designed instructions, but the accommodation pages may not look as lengthy because the students have access to those at all times.
So that could be something as simple as like preferential seating is listed in a lot of kids who have IEPs as one of their accommodations. That's in the DCAP, so now we don't need to list that in the IEP, so that the teacher doesn't now have to go read an IEP, read the DCAP, read a 504. They will just have accommodations listed in their 504 and their IEPs that are not listed in the DCAP.
Or if there's, so to use Caitlin's example, if it's preferential seating, if it has to be within, thinking about a microphone or something like that, within 5 feet of a speaker, that will be specific. So that would stay in the IEP because that is more specific and has a criteria to it. So if the accommodation has a specific criteria to it, that will be listed.
Okay, thank you. I think my only concern is that as parents get their new 504s or IEPs, they may wonder why their student is no longer getting certain accommodations. So I'm just going to ask that we overly communicate those potential changes to people.
Yep.
Thank you.
IEP and 504 meetings next year might be a little more lengthy than they have with some of the upcoming changes.
Okay, thank you. And thanks for all your work on both of those. I think that's a lot of good things happening in special ed. So I appreciate all the work that you're doing. Anyone else have anything?
Yeah, again, thank you.
Great.
Okay, thanks. Jessica, I think you're off the hook for the next one. Can we get a motion before I let?
I'll make a motion to approve the Student Opportunity Act submitted to DESE by Dr. Roberts Morandi. Second.
It's been first and seconded. Caitlin, if you want to introduce and let us know a little more about what this is.
So the Student Opportunity Act is something that every district is required to create every 3 years. It's an evidence-based plan for reducing persistent disparities in achievement amongst certain subpopulations of kids. So the plans must be submitted for the commissioner's review on a 3-year cycle, and then every year an annual progress report has to be submitted to the state as to how you are doing at fulfilling the different approaches you have placed within that plan. So Dr. Morandi had completed this plan prior to going out on her medical leave. And so I'm just going to give you a brief overview of what that plan is, and then I reached out to the state for some further guidance on a couple of things that I can just fill you in on before you take a vote on it. So the plan is to develop a multi-tiered system of support, that MTSS, for our high needs subgroup. So just so you're aware, high needs subgroup are kids that are either low income, economically disadvantaged, EL or former EL, or a student with disabilities. So they have one of those categories. Over the next 3 years, it is Sutton's intention to secure a research-based, high-quality ELA program for our students in K-5. So this would be a core program that would teach reading. So right now they have open court, probably 20 years old. It's extremely old, and a lot of teachers aren't even using it anymore because it is that outdated. We would continue to invest in high-quality professional development once this program is selected. We would develop a formal document that outlines our MTSS approach, so that's what Jessica is already working on with that team she talked to you about. And we would realign our class schedules to promote more supported classrooms during times when students need additional personnel. So one of the things that Jessica and I will be working on this summer is implementing a master schedule at the K-5 level. So in implementing a master schedule, each teacher would be given a schedule, and it would tell them, yes, when their specialist times are, but it would also tell them when they're teaching reading, when they're teaching writing, when they're teaching math, science, and social studies. And the reason being, if we develop those schedules from a higher level, we are then able to maximize the staff that we do have and send certain staff members into rooms that need additional support so that we can do more small group instruction, because that really is our goal. Because right now we're still seeing a lot of stand and deliver instruction for students, 25 students in front of you in some of our older grades, and one lesson taught one way is not necessarily going to produce equitable outcomes for all of our students. So why was K-5 identified? Parent input during some principal meetings that I've had this year, as well as some superintendent meetings that Dr. Morandi had that talk about the differences in resources available at our lower elementary level compared to the middle school and the high school. Courtney says this best when she talks about it. Our K-5 teachers are flying the plane while they're building it when it comes to ELA instruction right now. They are creating everything on their own. And in doing that, they are doing an amazing job, but not everyone is teaching the same things at the same time. And are we really giving all of our students equitable learning experiences if that's the case? Our DIBELS, our MAP, and our MCAS scores were also examined, and it showed that not only students in the high needs subgroup, but also just students in general have been falling behind scores that we had seen pre-COVID that were much higher. There is also a lack of standards-aligned research-based materials and practices in ELA instruction. So one of the things that my staff engaged in during a lot of our PD days this year was curriculum mapping. And they really haven't had the opportunity to do that before, where they sat down as grade level teams and they went month by month, week by week, and talked about what are we teaching and when, and then is what we're teaching actually aligned to the state standards, or is it just something we've always done? Do we need to think about switching that up because it's no longer aligned? And what came from that great work that I really want to say they did an amazing job with is that we're all not teaching the same thing. And so then these kids are moving on to a different grade level, and they're all getting combined into different classes, and they've all had different types of instruction. And not only that, you'll see that they also are taught things different language. So someone might call something a vowel team, and someone might call something else like sneaky E. And then when you mix all these kids and they go to another classroom, they all have different understandings of the same content. And for their brain to then be able to figure that out, it's tough when you're little. So the 3-year rollout plan, year 1 would be to create an action plan for the work and explore potential resources. So that would be for school year 24-25. And there will be an implementation of a master schedule, and we would continue our PD around the multi-tiered systems of support. Year 2 would be to purchase curriculum and also have a development of a teacher timeline that includes professional development and peer-to-peer coaching. So you hope to leverage the staff that you have in the building and kind of turn some of those staff members into instructional coaches. Year 3, continue with the professional development, coaching, and evaluation with any necessary adjustments being made. How will families and caregivers be involved? We have to detail that in the plan as well that we submit to the state. So district level data examination for families will occur, which will ensure that all administrators district-wide meet with families and are data fluent. We need to know what we're talking about, and we need to make sure we've had the professional development to do that. School level data examinations with teachers, IAs, related service providers will also allow for more data fluency. We want these teachers to feel comfortable talking to parents about the assessments that we do give and what the results actually mean. Data will be shared with families in meetings and via written communication. This is already happening in K-3 with our universal screener data. So per a recent regulation that went into effect this year, Any student, when given the Dibbles assessment in K to 3, if they get a composite score, which is the total of all of the subtests combined in the red, we have to notify families of that in writing. And we also have to notify families of what intervention plan is in place in order to get that student out of the red. Principal, assistant principal, caffeine and conversations, that's something that Courtney and I did this year bi-monthly in the morning. And we've already talked about to the PTO next year about making sure that those are every other month, once in the morning and once at night, because we know a lot of families have trouble getting there in the morning. School council will review and discuss data during the principal's report section of the meeting. We will have conversations with CPAC. The district is committed to providing data communication that is family friendly. I think a lot of the times we start using that education jargon that we all know what it means, but a lot of families don't. So just making sure that we're communicating that in an appropriate way. School council will also develop a survey regarding family engagement around data discussions. And school council membership will try and recruit and make sure that we have representation from our high needs subgroup families on school councils. So here's the piece where I got clarification from the state. So we have to give a cost allocation. And so the cost allocation that was provided to the state by Dr. Morandi was that a core ELA program for K to 5 would cost $45,000 per building for a total of $90,000. And that professional development and teacher stipends, if we were to create some coaching roles, would be around $22,000. So that's about $112,000 that we are allocating to this Student Opportunity Act. I had reached out to Karen Johnson. She is the person who is in charge of the Student Opportunity Act, just to clarify whether or not we would be tied to actually making sure that we could provide that amount of money over the next 3 years, just because we don't know what the budget will be in years to come, and $112,000 is a lot of money based on the recent discussions we've had about the budget. So she said the budget figures are the best estimate of how much the administration anticipates the district will be spending to support the implementation over the next 3 years. I can amend the budget narrative piece of the Student Opportunity Act to indicate that this is our current plan, but that actual expenditures in years 2 and 3 are contingent upon sufficient budget resource allocations. And then we will also have the opportunity to update the estimates in subsequent progress reports that would be due in April 2025 and April 2026.
Thank you. Any questions? A lot of information there.
Thank you. On the money, the 112K isn't allocated in a way that it's just this. I presume it is integral with the budget for the schools.
Mm-hmm.
So, okay.
And so some of the level 70 funding that is provided to schools every year, a portion of that is supposed to go towards the initiatives that you put into the Student Opportunity Act. So that's something to consider too. Is it going to be $112,000? No, over 3 years. So that's just something to consider as to whether or not we can actually put that amount of money into the budget moving forward.
And that's 112 over 3, not 112 for 3 years.
112 over 3 years, yep. But the tricky part is when you're purchasing a core ELA curriculum that's around $90,000, that's a one-time expense, probably in year 2. So you're looking at the 25-26 school year.
This current budget that's been approved has these funds in it?
No.
And isn't covered by other things that are going on?
Mm-mm.
I thought it was taken out. It was one of the things, right?
Can I ask our business manager if he happens to know? Thanks, Harrison.
During the construction of the FY 24-25 budget, this information was not readily available to the business office or, to my understanding, the principals to incorporate into the budget.
Thank you.
So it's not allocated.
So not currently allocated, yes. Thank you for that clarification, Harrison.
I'm
As
confused.
you,
We approved the 24-25, but you're saying that 90,000 is for 25-26?
It would be, because we wouldn't be purchasing the curriculum next year.
Okay, so we're okay.
so very little cost this year, but effort.
$90,000. I mean, we have professional development lines in the budget for 24-25 that we could use for some of this MTSS, and we also do a lot of it in-house, which is good on our professional development release days, but there is not money for curriculum currently in the budget.
Which would be the 90K, not in the current budget we're talking, not in this year, not in the following year, the budget that we've agreed on. It would be the year after that.
Yep, 25-26.
So for next year's, or next school year, how much would this cost?
$90,000.
No.
Oh, for next school year.
Cheers, 22?
It would be,
Less than that. It's 112 over 3.
Okay.
yeah.
90 of it is in the second year.
And then the 22,000 is really spread out over the 3 years, if you think about it that way. We could say about $7,000 a year if you were
Okay.
gonna
In
do it
terms of-
evenly, but we are not gonna have the coaching in place next year. That would be a year 2 thing, so year 1 next year, minimal cost, and it can probably be mostly delivered during the professional development days that our teachers already are engaging in, so that's no additional cost.
So in terms of immediate impact to the budget that we've approved, it should be marginal,
Yep.
minimal.
And that's why I would recommend me going in and amending it to put in that narrative piece, is to make them aware that we're not totally 100% certain that we can.
My
Add
impression is
90,000.
you can update them now, or you can update, you're gonna have to provide an update, and it seems like they're amenable to if things change. I don't know that you need to call a flag immediately, but,
I mean, you get to a point where some things can't be funded.
Right.
And it just.
and we just
yeah.
don't know what that budget will. One other, as you read through, did it make sense if you were, had the thrill of presenting this forward? Is this pretty much what you would be looking at presenting?
And it's aligned to the district strategic plan too, because one of the district strategic plan goals was to develop a curriculum committee, and Ann Korn and I led that this year, and did some great work, and we were kind of at a standstill because we did all of this amazing work, but then couldn't do the next steps because we didn't have the money to then explore the curriculum resources like we wanted to.
So this feels like good plan, had a couple of different sets of eyes on it, concern with the next coming budget. Where would we come up with the funds if it went forward, if it continued the way it likely would?
If we're doing what's best for the kids at the K-5 level, they do need a core ELA program in place.
So the sound of it is, from what I'm understanding, is this could potentially be handled through a lot of PD next year, to a degree. It's the year after we have to make sure that that's planned in the budget, which, we all expect it's gonna be a difficult budget next year. But that's a focal point, that if this is what the district needs, and especially at the younger grades, which is critical, we need to keep that front and center.
The biggest risk is you do the work, you come up with it, you got a great idea, great program, we don't have any money for it, and that can be disheartening. But
At that point, you can also then explore, like, do you not launch K-5 all at once? Do you launch it in K-2 first? So then you're only spending $45,000, and then in year 3, you launch it in 3 to 5, and you do just a slower rollout. Even if you had to do grade by grade, I think just getting the curriculum in place with a plan is what we need.
Thank you. I appreciate
Thank you.
is there direction on, do you need direction on whether to notify? I'm not concerned, my opinion is you tell them when you need to tell them, but
I just have to submit to the state once you vote to approve.
I think as long as we vote to approve it, it's fine. That's my thought. I mean, she has to give updates anyways to Desi on progress, so I don't see a reason we need to change our. Any other questions or concerns before we take it to a vote? Okay, we'll vote then.
Darling, aye?
Jerome, I.
Gibbons, aye.
Brennan, I.
Edwards, aye.
5-0. Motion passes 5-0. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Gabe.
All right, we'll move to the budget and finance portion of the meeting tonight then. We'll start with the fiscal year 24 budget update.
Start with, we need 90K.
That's what's in the briefcase. Surprise.
Now that would be a magic trick.
All right, so this is our usual monthly reconciliation of the FY24 budget. So for those of you who have the packet at home, it's going to be something like this. As in prior months, we're going to start going through each of the 4 buildings' general operating budget. It'll give you a good sense. You can also have the respective buildings' munis year-to-date budget report open, as well as those reports drive this Excel spreadsheet. So
Can
just
I ask one question and?
Yep.
All right. How come this is dated April 30th, but the munis is dated May 13th?
So we name the file just with month end. The
Okay.
munis file, give or take whenever the town actually processes warrants, is when munis gets updated. So in any given month, it doesn't always end on the exact last day of the month. Otherwise, I'm not capturing the full month's data. It might flow into the following month a little bit.
Okay.
So that's why
I
you might
just
see
wanted
some
to
overlap.
ask, make sure they were comparable.
So for the Simonian Center, if we go down, just looking at the percentage used in each category, salaries are at 70%, summer programs 95%, overtime 18%, heating 83%, utilities 111%, so that one's highlighted red because it's over budget. Building services 85%, supplies 64%, field trips 52%, technology 96%, instructional services 53%. And then we skip down to library books, 38%, other expenses, 68%, and contracted services has just hit that 100% threshold. So a few things that I'll highlight here. Utilities is primarily some of our charter services, which is subsidized through an E-rate program. We're working on how that is set up in the future, where the E-rate reduces each monthly bill as the bill is sent in. This year it was a little bit different because they were looking for direction and they just sent a check out for the E-rate balance. So that was deposited into the technology revolving account. So I do have to reclassify that revenue out across all 4 buildings to reduce that overage. So don't be concerned that it's over. It just needs a reclassification so that it's in line with what was voted through. As far as contracted services, there's still a large portion that is encumbered for the school year, about 31,000. So we do have to go in and start looking at some of those areas that are overspent. I don't anticipate that it's going to go over more than maybe 2 or 3 percentage points above 100% used, but really the business office just needs the month of June, as we always do, to close our books down and go through the expenses and reclassify anything. Some of that could be related to grants that need to pull funds that were expensed in the general budget off to an allocation. We just need the time to process that. So overall, the Simonian Center's at a 73% usage rate for the year, and you're going to see a large jump now that the town has shared with the school's business office the accruals for staff, whether they elect to receive a lump sum payment or a distribution throughout the summer months. We have that information now, so I'm going to be able to look into the general operating budget and see where we're going to land, because really a lot of these remaining budgeted lines are tied up with revenue. And once the town makes those accrual entries, it's going to eat it up very fast, and then we'll have a better idea of the remaining balance for each building.
Can you help me on this one?
Yep.
And remind me again, on the summary sheet, the year-to-date encumbered for the salaries, it shows there's no encumbrances for
Correct.
salaries.
We don't encumber salaries, and like I've discussed in the past, I'm kind of on the fence on whether or not next year, starting July 1st, I am going to encumber salaries. I've stayed away from it because you don't know if a staff member is going to stay with you. You don't know if they have a lane change coming, or if they're changing positions throughout the year, or if they're retiring halfway through the year. So I don't like encumbering for that reason, because you always have the chance that you're encumbering an expense and then you're going to have to go in, close the encumbrance down, and then put an entry into Munis to reflect that. But I have gotten a lot of feedback and looked at other school districts to see if they are encumbering their salaries, and I've seen more encumber than not, so we might go down that path.
The revised budget is there, so it's sort of, is probably the best guess where that line's gonna land anyways, I
Yeah.
would think.
Yeah, I mean, the way it's presented here, it'll give you a pretty good estimate on any changes to someone who might be receiving more salary than they started the year with if we do a budget transfer.
Thank you. One other is sort of the re-education for me. From the Munis report perspective, the whole Munis report runs down to the general budget, but there are lines in the Munis report that would indicate basically offsetting lines to show where revolving accounts were being applied.
Correct. Where school committee votes for those allocations to be put in, I do offset the general operating budget.
So as I was reading through that, it'll show up pretty quickly as two, and they'd be relatively large numbers where it's added and pulled out. Is that?
Yes, so you might not see it in your year-to-date rate there, right? In prior renditions, when I'm having you guys vote through the budget, yes, that's exactly the correct understanding. Here, a year-to-date is only what you've done up to date, and since we don't move those until June, you're probably not gonna see a lot of them. You might see some, but I do most of those large reclasses in the month of June.
That makes a ton of sense. Thank you.
So moving on to the elementary school, and I don't want to take up too much time, but as we end the fiscal year, it's even more important to just review the financials.
Yeah.
So same setup, 74% used for salary, 97% for summer programs, 35% for overtime, heating at 83%, utilities again at 111% used, building services 85%, supplies 70%, field trips 59%, technology 83%, guidance 51%. Then we skip down to library books at 63%, other expenses 78%, and contracted services at 100%. You know, the same thing with the Simonian Center utilities is going to be just reclassing that revenue source over the 4 buildings. And contracted services, you have a large portion still tied up in encumbrances, but again, you're at the 100% used mark. So we're going to keep a pretty close eye on that, and in the next month we'll see. Overall, you are 76% used for the fiscal year, leaving you with about $1 million left in that, and most of it's going to be tied up with those salary accrual entries. Middle school, salaries are at 67% used, summer programs 82%, overtime 32%, heating 80%, utilities 111%, building services 79%, supplies 85%, technology 82%, textbooks 87%, library books 61%, other expenses 105%, contracted services 100%. So same thing with the utilities, same thing with contracted services. There's still a large number tied up with encumbrances for the end of the year. Other expenses are over budget in the middle school as we currently stand by about 5 percentage points. Now there are a number of grants such as the ESSA or title grants that do offset some of these expenses, as well as some middle school Open Sci-Ed grants that are out there. So I really do have to look into that, and then I will have a better understanding next month if there is any remaining balances. But again, the district is in a budget freeze currently, so there shouldn't be additional other expenses that come through there. Some of the major items, as I pointed out in prior school committee meetings with the middle school and high school specifically, was that hot water tank that we transferred funds over to cover. So back when I presented that, we were at about 130% use. So we have lowered it down to about 105%, which is in the right direction, but there's still more work to be done. And again, you can look along with the Munis report to see just what I'm talking about.
And just for anybody who's listening but not looking at the slide deck, the 5% is $2,900.
Correct. It's very de minimis in value, but it's still something we want to
Need to
take
point
care
out,
of.
I just didn't want folks to be concerned it was 5% of the,
5% of 100,000 and 5% of 2,000 is very different, but still 5%, yeah.
Sorry, I skipped ahead before overall, the middle school's at 71% used, leaving with about $1,100,000 remaining. Again, mostly tied up in salaries. The final building is the high school, salary at 86%, summer program 77%, overtime 34%, heating 80%, utilities 111%, building services 79%, supplies 75%, field trip 12%, instructional equipment 96%, technology 94%, guidance 4%, instructional services 43%, textbooks 83%, library books 61%, other expenses 84%, contracted services 88%. So you'll see the utilities one pop back up again. And I do want to point out for clarification, when you look at guidance, don't say that's the guidance counselor's salary. It's just the supplies they utilize to run that specific department. Overall, the high school is at 85% used of their fiscal budget, leaving them with about $680,000 of funds available, again, mostly tied up in salaries. The final general operating budget location is the district-wide offices, salaries at 91%. Overtime 45%, utilities 93%, building services at 113%, supplies at 70%, technology 100%, tuition out 750%, other expenses 49%, and contracted services 89%. So I'll highlight the areas of concern, or not so much concern, but areas I'll address further. Tuitions, obviously, as I've said in prior months, I'll be reclassing those and actually have already sent up all of the reclassifications for some of the larger grants, such as the 240 grant, which is at about $400,000. The town has already processed that, so it's already done. You'll see it in the next month's summary. We'll be moving into the circuit breaker reclassification later this week, which is about $1.1 million of reclassifications out of the general budget. So we've got some big entries coming up that's going to reduce that 750% over down to level funded. Building services, it's a difficult one because that's the area that includes anything related to grounds or the water treatment plant, and there's been some unforeseen expenses that are still rolling in from some of those days where the water pressure did drop. It's unexpected, but we will start to identify funds as we close down the fiscal year and other GLs, and then present a budget transfer to the school committee at next month's meeting. So you're aware of where I'm identifying funds of best interest to transfer to cover that expense, and then put it to a vote. Overall, the district-wide budget's at 202% used, with a negative $1.9 million over budget. Again, we've got $1.1 million from circuit breaker, close to 400 in grant 240, another 700,000 from town allocations. There's more than enough reclassification work that still needs to take place to bring that down to a level budget.
Can I ask another one?
Sure.
I haven't reached my limit yet.
Almost.
Almost. The percent use salary from building to building, I presume those are different because different buildings have had events where they've used other teachers or things of that nature.
So in some cases, there could have been a resignation, an early retirement, a transfer, a lane change, a lot of those come into play, or just not filling the position because, let's say, the candidate pool might have been small and it took longer to fill the position. All of those can contribute to your salary percentages being at a varied level as opposed to just being 86% across. And when you're dealing with percentages too, you have your salaried folks and then your hourly folks, and it's not an even distribution from building to building.
Thanks.
So that concludes the general operating budget portion. Now we'll move into the capital accounts. Again, this is a new portion of my presentation. There hasn't been much action on the capital accounts. However, in recent weeks, Matt Murphy has again started up the process of doing more roof repairs with our vendors. So they were out there today trying to identify any other areas of concern on the middle school, high school roof. We have $75,000 allocated to roof repairs, and it'll roll from year to year, but we're trying to fix these problems when there's no snow and ice on the roof. Smart boards are all installed at this point. The wireless upgrade's completed, and we're most likely going to be rolling over some of these to the following fiscal year, specifically the underground storage tank. I've been working with Matt Murphy to try and link this to another capital project, one that just got voted through, which is the asphalt and repair of the back of the Simonian and elementary school. So if we're ripping out or removing some of the surface around the underground oil storage tank back there by that loading dock, it only makes sense to incorporate that at the same time that you're doing the asphalt paving. That way you're not doing it twice. So that capital project will roll to the next fiscal year, but it is identified as being a project for completion this summer. The carpet replacement, the vendor's already been awarded. We've gone through the Mass General Law procurement process to award that. So they'll begin the carpet/flooring installation in the Simonian Center next month. So that will be used up. The only two areas left are the technology replacement, which I believe Dan Durgan, Director of Technology, has identified an area to utilize those funds, and then the middle school, high school door replacement, which will roll to the next fiscal year just with no time remaining, and procurement process hasn't yet started for that capital project. Besides that, everything else is moving along on schedule. The next page is the checking and savings accounts for all of the respective buildings. So I'll just highlight the totals of each of the Simonian Centers, ending March balance. And again, March balance, because by the time I receive the summary reports, it's usually too late to incorporate that into this month. So Simonian Center's at $27,243.83. Elementary school checking account is at $14,235.71. Middle school checking and savings account at $40,453.05, and the high school checking and savings balance is $120,609.78. A lot of those values will decrease substantially once graduation, end of year field trips are paid for. Specifically the middle school and high school, with both of those graduations having specific events for the seniors. Those funds will be drawn down. There'll still be much higher balances than the Simonian and elementary school, just in the nature of how the students raise the funds, but we'll keep an eye on it.
And the kids are bigger. Right.
Yeah, and for reference, I have thresholds that I have to follow as far as what triggers an audit. The Simonian Center and elementary school can be done with an internal audit conducted by my office. Same with the middle school and high school, but unlike the Simonian Center and elementary school, the middle and high school, because of the quantity of funds they have in those accounts, will trigger an external audit, right? So they go above that balance that the state says that we can't continue to do an internal audit and not have an external audit, which we'll be examining. So the next portion is the grant allocations. This file is ever growing. It seems as though grants are much larger than in other fiscal years, but we'll go through it really quickly. The district currently possesses $391,702.09 worth of grant revenue. From the prior month, that still is an increase of $35,732.45 in funding, right? So there's two grant platforms through GEMS, which is the new DESI platform for grant distribution and application, and then there's Grantium, which is the older platform. Grants are split between the two right now. They haven't transferred all over. With the older platform, you actually have to follow a window so that you can request funds to be distributed, which usually follows the end of the month. So there's limited windows in which you can still request funds for some of those grants, but we'll see to it that for any grants that do need funds requested, that we're requesting distribution as they come through. Is there any questions on grants right now? The final update for the month of April is our revolving accounts. We've had a lot of success trying to stabilize these accounts, specifically this year more so than other years, and a primary factor is just managing them in a more conservative financial manner, as well as increasing revenues where necessary and reducing expenses where necessary. You'll see the first large reduction in a in a revolving account is the cafeteria account, and I believe before Dr. Morandi's FMLA leave, she did indicate that the cafeteria department did have to return some funds. So that is why you're seeing a much larger reduction in the account balance from the prior months, is because we weren't receiving distribution at the same quantity that we were prior because of that audit finding. So I'll just go through some of the key highlights. Athletics is at $22,712.98. School choice is at $570,869.05. This balance remains healthy, although, as I've said, I do have to reclassify up to $520,000 out of that balance to high school salaries. That's how we allocated it. At this point, I don't foresee us needing any more funds out of that original allocation, so we'll operate as it was voted through. I think there's going to be a decent chance that we're going to move funds out of the general operating budget that were not used into school choice. Again, we won't know until we close the books for the school year. Student activities were at $155,285.25. This is a very healthy balance. The allocation is set to about $105,000. Usually we end the year with this account drawn down to about $10,000 to $20,000, so it's much higher than prior fiscal years. Aftercare is at $224,948.50. That's a very healthy number for an account to have, especially when it was negative when I first started. This helps us offset salary expenses where necessary. It helps improve the program, expand the program. I'm very happy with the direction that the program's going in, and I hope that it continues to stay in a financially stable pattern. As I said, circuit breakers currently sitting at $815,859. That's 3/4 of distribution. June is the final fourth quarter distribution. It's $271,953, so that will go above $1.1 million, and then we'll do the reclassification. Beyond that, sped transportation stays at a healthy balance of $148,608.50, and that's really the last area I'll highlight. The overall revolving account balance is $2,464,401.33. It's an increase of $226,762.16 from the prior month. So very healthy, but it's right where we need to be in order to operate at the fiscal standing the committee voted through.
Thank you. Anyone have any questions or comments on that?
Yeah, I think it looks good. I like the presentation. Obviously, thank you to yourself and the business department. It's a lot of work and a lot of work to come over the next month, but very much appreciated, and thank you.
Yeah, same, thanks, not just for having it ready to go, but also when there are questions, it's very comfortable with your control of that.
Yeah, thank you. And I know over this past year, we've changed the format on you a ton of times for your presentation. I don't
We're not done yet, right?
I don't have any comments tonight. I'm just saying thank you. I know it was a lot to make those changes. Just going back to the different schools real quick, I think heating averaged to like 80% or so. Do we think we're gonna need any more of those funds?
So I believe, with speaking with the facilities manager, we've received our last delivery for the fiscal year. Usually what we have at the end of this year, we top the tanks off to the extent possible, and then we operate on that until about the fall when the next delivery is needed. I did recently have a meeting with the French River Collaborative in which they awarded the FY26 oil bid. We already had FY25 done, which was presented earlier. FY26 is very positive. It's actually lower than FY25's account. And we do that purposefully because when times are good with oil, we try to capitalize on that as best we can. I can't remember offhand what the price per gallon was, but I believe it was about 12 to 13 cents lower than the prior year. So that's very beneficial. Doing it out that way allows us to have a remainder in that GL at the end of the fiscal year. It was awarded to the same vendor that we currently have, which is Burke. In years past, it's been Peterson. They also bid on the contract, but they were not the lowest bidder. So we should assume that GL will have funds left in it for at least the next 2 fiscal years, and we'll reclassify or transfer those should we identify the need. Or if they're very cold winters and we just so happen to use more fuel than in prior years, it's just a buffer that allows us to operate in.
Thank you.
When you get oil delivered, 200, 250 gallons?
That's beyond the scope of my knowledge. I know that the tanks are about 12,000 gallon tanks. I don't believe they always let them get bone dry. I think they try to fill it when there's a quarter left, or there's a system in place for it.
But that's perfect for anybody thinking about it, right? It isn't 250 gallon tank in the basement. It's
No.
9,000 gallons.
Yeah, I think the district's total usage is closer to 40 to 60,000 gallons a year, and we're not talking about your standard heating oil. This is number 2 bunker fuel, which is its own type of
You have to
product.
heat it up a little bit before you put it into the
Yeah,
fire. It's
yeah.
pretty cool stuff.
But not too hot, or else it'll ruin our new oil storage
That's right.
tank capital project.
Thank you. Thanks for all your work. I think with that, we can move to the transportation portion.
I would like to make a motion to approve reducing the number of buses for the Simonian Center and Elementary School by 1 bus.
Second.
It's been first and seconded, so open it up for discussion. Harrison, anything you want to comment on and maybe fill this committee on a little bit?
So the business office was asked to go to our awarded contract vendor, A Transportation, and inquire the possibility, should the committee decide to reduce the number of buses, which is here to inform you, based off of my conversations with Ron, the owner of AA, the committee is more than within your rights of the contract to reduce the number of buses. So you can if you want. He also wanted to express a number of other items you should consider before making that decision. Reducing a bus at the Simonian and elementary level is not as simple as one might be able to assume looking on paper. I know that the chart in the contract that we have showing the estimates of student riders per bus looks like there's a lot of empty seats on some buses and not many on others, or less. Sutton's a very different geographic town than a lot of our peers. We have longer roads with people spaced further and further apart in some areas, and then we have 60% of our town in one little corner. So when you reduce a bus, it's not saying, let's get rid of a bus and then take the average of students from that bus and then throw them on all the remaining buses. It's, if we get rid of a bus, it has to be from the one corner of the town where the population's the highest. So, for instance, the Manchog part of town, the stops are much further apart than, let's say, the Highlands. So you're not going to see a rider change on the buses that service, I'll call it, you know, the 60% of the geography of the town. You're going to see a rider change in that one corner of town where the population density is the greatest, because that's where they're able to make those changes. Some of the stops on the other side of town, we don't have sidewalks. We don't have the ability to do group stops like we do in the neighborhoods where we do have sidewalks. So you might have buses that, for instance, are still at 50 people per bus on the Manchog side of town, but then on the neighborhood part of town with Peachtree and Highland and all those other boroughs, the rider quantity could go up to the 72 individuals per bus. You're going to have more group stops because they now have even fewer buses on that side of town, but because the population density is so high, they're able to do that, right? They're not able to do it on the other side of town. Otherwise, your bus routes are going to be an hour and a half plus long because the stops are so far apart. You take a bus from over there, they're going to have to drive further distances to get more and more students on. It's just not feasible, and that is at the discretion of the bus company how they structure the routes. So you're within your bounds to remove one. You just have to understand that the bus is going to be removed from the high population density part of town, and there are going to be more group stops, and there's a possibility that we might not be able to allow students to bring instruments to school on the bus. They might have to have their parents drive their instrument in, or they might have to be driven in altogether, because if you're putting, let's say, 70 kids on a bus, because that's how the math works out, there's very little room remaining for large instruments to be in the seats. So you might have to make that decision and say, well, we can't really allow instruments because the population's so great on these buses. And I don't know how you could, share that equally on all the other buses if some buses can have extra belongings be brought on and some can't. If some buses are now having more group stops, and it's debatable if the safety level is at risk for having kids walking down roads that may or may not have sidewalks. Those are the things that Ron just wanted to share. Sutton's a unique town compared to our neighboring school districts, and we have unique problems.
I appreciate all that. Maybe it's my engineering background, but I had an issue. I looked at the bus routes and I made a proposal last year, and because of my unique location being kind of near two different bus routes, I have two kids on two different buses. I know not everyone is in that situation, but I think I know there's overlap, like with the Manchog area and bus 7 and 5. Like, I know freakishly more than I should know about these bus routes. And I know that we added a bus last year. So what did we do before we had that bus? Like, I just don't,
So what we did before we had that, because this year is the first year that bus is operating at
Right.
that level. The prior year was my first year, and I will say the disciplinary problems on buses have only grown, right? So you remove a bus, you have more students on the buses. How do you manage that? And two, the number of concerns coming in from parents about safety and children walking on main roads to buses has also decreased. So there's give and take with all of it. And I'm sure that there are some buses that drive by where other buses are also on those roads, but it just might be because that's a main access road where they're having to turn around down in that part of town. I'm just going off of what the industry experts advise me and sharing that with you.
I know. It's just when it's $96,000 and we were just talking about needing 90,000 for curriculum, and I mean, if we just nod and say, okay, I just don't know if we're asking the right questions, and believe me, I struggle, and I have firsthand knowledge of disciplinary concerns on the buses recently. So, well aware. I'm just, people know I'm for smaller class sizes. I want to get the right curriculum. I will drive my children if it meant, and I know not everyone's in that situation, so.
Is the savings 96,000? Is that?
You can take an estimate of the quantity of buses and then divide that by the total cost. Ultimately, does the vendor have to honor that? No, not necessarily. I mean, it's a contract based off of the overall cost to operate. For instance, when we reduce a bus at the middle school, high school, it's not $96,000, but that's up to the vendor. We as a district we're charged based off of the total expected expense, and then you can assume that it's going to be a rough average of the elementary reduction.
But that's a fair estimate at 96. You didn't get an indication that you guys aren't going to see more.
I don't recall the total of the contract offhand. It would be up there. I don't want to commit to any one number, but yeah, that's the correct understanding.
And can we get Caitlin? Can we get your thoughts on unloading the buses and just general reaction to the idea?
I think for me, one of the biggest points that I struggle with is similar to the sentiments that Harrison shared when it comes to discipline on the bus. If we have more kids on buses, it's more likely than not that we're going to have increased student behaviors. And with the amount of buses we have right now, Courtney and I are really at our capacity for dealing with those behaviors. And I'm not quite sure that we'll be able to deal with those lower level behaviors on a consistent basis. Courtney, I would say in a week, so usually Courtney does most of the bus stuff, and then if it rises to a certain level, it comes to me, or if she's overwhelmed, I help her with that. But sometimes she's spending 4 to 5 hours a week watching bus footage now. Videos of parents who are calling and reporting incidents, and then it's our job to investigate whether or not that incident actually happened. And if we're getting two conflicting stories from 5-year-olds on a bus, then the only option we really have then is to pull the video footage, and the video footage can sometimes be 50 minutes long, and we're just looking for that 2-minute window of when the behavior happened. So I think that if the buses do become more crowded than they already are, my inkling is that you're going to have increased student behaviors, and I just don't know if Courtney and I will be able to address the lower level behavior like we attempt to do now.
Thank you. The notion of a bus with 45 or with 65 in terms of unloading or loading it, would that make much difference?
So in the morning, it's a pretty seamless process. We can unload 5 to 6 buses at a time. And they're all inside within 8 to 10 minutes. So it's not a long time to unload the buses. I do say that parent pickup tends to be extremely busy on days that it rains. So we get a sneak peek at what it might look like if more parents decide to start driving their kids to school because the buses may be a little bit overcrowded or they're seeing increases in student behavior. I imagine that some families may choose to drive their kids to school, and then that adds a whole other layer to that piece, just because we still do get some calls sometimes from the police department if the traffic is backed up on Boston Road for an extended period of time in the morning. Right now, we can get everyone in the building by 8:30, so it's a 15-minute time frame where we have upwards of 100 kids being dropped off, and we have it down to a science. But if that were to increase, I can see that delaying our day and the instructional time that kids might be missing if now we're doing drop-off until 8:40.
Thank you. It's I don't know where I stand, but I know it was a good question and it deserved sort of poking and getting a sense of. So I appreciate putting it on the agenda and actually sorting out.
Do we have a date we need to let AA know if we were to decide to do this? Did he give you any?
So one date or timeline that I usually like to follow is when I close out the higher grade levels' ability to pay for a seat on a bus, which I believe, and don't quote me on it, it's usually around June 15th or 16th. And once I close that payment window down, obviously if you move to town or there's other circumstances, we can work with you on that. But once June 15th rolls around, I give that data to AA so that they can start, inputting it into their GPS system to start replicating routes. If I delay it beyond, the June timeframe, we went down that path last year. Last year I tried a new system where parents could elect to use the bus, should they choose, or not elect to use the bus. And, I can tell you right now, I'm pretty good with numbers, but I don't believe we only had 100 families wanting to ride the bus in town. It was much greater, but whether it was just the form of communication received for it or it was just a new process and people didn't understand it, it delayed AA's ability to get the bus routes created, which then delays when we turn it around and give it to parents so they know where their kid's getting picked up, if it's a group stop or what bus number they're on, for instance. They usually need about 2 months to turn that around with the amount of towns they service. So mid-June's really the best timeline I can give you.
That's a sentiment probably worth repeating for anybody watching. It matters if you're going to use the bus. The sooner the administration knows, the sooner the bus company knows, and it takes them a while to build the routes.
And the one thing with bus fees for the higher grade levels that we hold true on is if you don't sign up in the higher grade level and you do need a bus, my hands are tied as far as getting you on the bus at your stop or wherever your driveway is, for instance. Once that window closes and I send the data off to the transportation company to create these routes, my hands are more or less tied with where you're going to be picked up and dropped off every day. You might have to go to the nearest bus stop, so your parent might have to drive you, down to the end of Stone School Road to get to the next nearest bus stop. If you don't sign up, I can't predict where you live and if you're going to ride the bus or not.
And I just want to say, thank you and AA for looking at all this and assisting with this because, it is the stuff we should be considering. I appreciate that.
No, I appreciate it. And when we're looking at the budget and finding money, I mean, the transportation, that's just one big bucket. So I know you did your due diligence. I appreciate all this effort, so.
Thank you.
One piece that I don't know how much it plays into it, if you're filling a bus at the more densely populated areas, that full bus will have a shorter period of time where you're on a dense bus.
I mean, hypothetically, yes.
Sure.
The town's very interesting as far as, which neighborhoods report on what bus and if they have side streets and all that factors into it. But yeah, if you have more kids in a higher density area, your bus ride should be shorter, but you're going to be sitting 3 to a seat.
Right.
I know you said this, but I just want to make sure that we are clear for everyone. We don't determine the routes. AA does.
No, we do not determine the bus routes. It's often misunderstood that the district can decide. Not every bus company is the same, so I won't state that that's, if you know friends in another town and their administration has a different bus company, it might not work the same way. But I operate under the philosophy of we hire a vendor who has industry knowledge. They have software and tools that assess the safety of roads. They have qualified individuals who are working this to trust their opinion and guidance when creating the routes and to leave that to them. We pay them to facilitate that, and they do a pretty good job at it. So as far as where my ability to alter a route goes, unless there's a severe safety concern that would jeopardize a child's ability to get to school, we really don't make exceptions to that. If it does involve safety, yes, we will always listen to any parent who has concerns about their child who might have to walk to a neighboring stop on a very congested road and there's no sidewalks. Those are things that I will more than gladly bring up to AA once they've completed the routes and we've posted them and parents have time to review it. But if it's, I want to move buses because my friend is on another bus and I know that bus has overlap, I'm going to say no. And a lot of times that is a point of confrontation with the parents, but I don't make exceptions on it because it opens up a lot of other areas and it's just best not to.
My only other question is, do we have an estimate on the incoming kindergarten size versus the fifth grade going to sixth? I know that is our biggest class in the district, so.
So our kindergarten this year is actually pretty high in numbers too. We have about
Okay.
22 kids in kindergarten, which before we were looking at classes of 18. The enrollment now, it's still been a little bit slow. I think the last time I checked, it was at 80 something, but I would anticipate that more will continue to come in now that we're reaching out to schedule screening appointments for the end of June.
And, we did reduce a bus at the higher grade levels as well. So even though that fifth grade class is of a greater size, they're going into, should they choose to ride the bus, because not everyone at those grade levels choose to. We did reduce a bus at the middle school, high school grade level. So, even though there's room to play with on those routes, it's going to be larger than prior years.
Ben, I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead, Bruce.
Harrison. Sorry.
Oh, you're muted.
It's the joys of living in an airport. Harrison, what do we do if there are increased discipline issues or increased safety issues? Should we remove the bus? Do we have the ability to add the bus back in?
It's once I give that information to AA on reducing a bus, I would say for the remainder of next school year, no, just with the difficulties of adding it. I mean, theoretically, over Christmas break, if you went without a bus for a few months and it was just too unbearable to operate, we could use Christmas break to add a bus in, but it would be a very lengthy strategic operation, I would say, to make sure the parents of affected students know that their bus number's changing midway through the year. We always have the opportunity to add or reduce buses at the end of the fiscal year as well. But it is a good point to make, Bruce.
Thank you.
Anything else, Bruce, or just that one?
That's enough.
Okay. Anyone else have any questions?
Do you want to continue it? Right now, we're scheduled for a vote. Would
Right.
you rather?
Amend it.
No, I mean, I have been asking this and I haven't found an administrative or anyone that's really involved in this that thinks it's a good idea. So I'm not one to keep at it. I just wanted to make sure that we weren't, dismissing a large sum of money that we could be applying somewhere else, so.
And I think it's a healthy conversation to have at the end of every fiscal year. Should this incoming kindergarten class be smaller than projected? Or the interest in riding the buses be less than what we've estimated? I think at the end of any fiscal year, you should evaluate it because you are right. It is a large amount of money, and it should deserve at least one meeting a year to revisit it and evaluate it.
Or the students are behaving so well.
Too.
And I know, Courtney is in charge of our PBIS team, which is Positive Behavior Interventions and Supports. And one of the things that they started working on towards the end of this year was putting in some PBIS initiatives onto the bus. It hasn't come to fruition yet, but that's a goal for year 2 of the committee. So if they do put some supports in place where kids are being positively rewarded for good behavior choices, and we see less behavior on the bus, I definitely think this is a conversation that we could have next year as well.
sounds like we might be okay to take this to a vote tonight then.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, we'll start with you then, Jen.
Oh, I say no. Right, nay? No.
Depending on how you
Right.
want to
I
vote.
want it, you say nay.
Nay.
If you
I was
want
like,
it-
I couldn't, I haven't said no. Darling, nay.
Jerome, nay.
Gibbons, nay.
Brennan, no.
Edwards, nay.
Again, thank you so much for all the effort on this.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'll
thank
leave you alone.
But sorry,
Great
but
discussion.
great to continue to push. It's something that made sense.
Yeah,
to-
absolutely. Yeah, I think it's always good for us to consider these things, especially ones that have large budget impacts. Any other business office updates that you want to note?
Yep. So very briefly, I'll just acknowledge, I know at the last meeting in the middle school, high school auditorium, the school committee made a motion to have the business office conduct a financial audit. I just want to take a moment to acknowledge that I did hear the motion. So the business office will conduct a financial audit on the Connections program for the FY 24 school year. We will be more than happy to share our findings at a future meeting.
Thank you.
Thank you.
What's the time frame?
You know, because of the nature of expenses still coming in, I'm not saying for Connections, but just in general with the fiscal year, I would like the fiscal year to be closed before the audit begins. That way, all data and expenses are accounted for, the books are closed, nothing can be moved, nothing can be changed. Then I will assemble a financial investigative team to go in, and the scope of the audit will be as follows. It will examine revolving accounts, grants, general budget, and student activities, or the checking and savings accounts for the high school. We'll go through emails, we'll have interviews. The audit will be a complete scope of the Connections program, and anything that could have monetary value will be assessed. And, you know, to do that thoroughly, I would say, you know, the summer months, and we'd want to target a date when the school reconvenes in the fall.
Today, a teacher asked if, I don't know if I can say who it is, the newspaper was curious if they could do like a story or be a part of the audit.
The student newspaper?
Yeah, the high school. Does that seem like
I want to explore sort of the independence level of the motion, and while I think it's a good learning, I also think it's sort of a hot topic, and would like to understand how we ensure independence in reporting, and that it's
maybe after?
I mean, the student newspaper would be certainly free to publish an article about it once the reportings are made. But I'm in agreement with you, Paul. I would prefer that it remain an independent investigation.
And I guess I'm also a little curious. In my mind, the goal of, and maybe we should clarify that, right? But the goal of the audit is to understand what funds were spent for Connections and for CONCON. How much does that cost
That
the
whole scope.
town? That those
Correct.
two. Oh, okay. And it's a report to the committee. We think best guess right now it wouldn't be until September for you to be able to.
Yeah, I prefer to just have an independent and not rush the process. And, you know, in order for my department to be thorough in our investigation and to have it be independent, I would say that the summer months when our work dies down for the rest of it's a very busy time for the business office to wind down the books for a fiscal year, and I don't want an audit to dilute the quality of work to close a fiscal year on top of it. So the summer months would be ideal to begin and close the investigation, and then to hammer out a date once we're satisfied with our investigation to present our findings to the committee.
Findings reported to the committee, and then you'll have your staff. Is there anyone else that should be involved? And again, I'm questioning around the level of independence. Do you need advice?
Kind of hard to hear.
Sorry, what I was trying to do is clarify on the independence level and how we define it's Harrison and his staff. There isn't need for any of the committee or any of other parties to be involved.
The one person that I might rely on as a reference would be Erin Chinapi. I mean, ultimately, she does report to both the school and the town, but with a split role and her involvement in payroll, I will rely on her services if needed.
But otherwise, I think the intent is that it's an independent with just you and your team.
Yep. And, audits are second nature, so we'll present the findings in a neutral, independent manner, and the committee can make sense of them once they're presented.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ben?
Yeah.
I couldn't hear the first part of what Paul said, but this isn't just on what was spent. The intent of the audit is the cost, but where was the money coming from? And Harrison, appreciate you doing this, but please don't consider this an investigation. This is just an audit. Just be careful of the word that's used. This is an independent audit of the funds that were expended and the funds where the funds came from. It's not an investigation.
Yep. Nope. Sorry if that word kind of made it seem like it was an investigation. My intent is just a financial audit of pure finances, nothing more.
Thank you. Any other updates you wanted to provide?
Beyond that, we've got a couple projects in the business office. Our bus that we own, the full-size bus, is receiving more repairs than I would ideally like to continue with. So now that it's gone through almost the rest of this school year, we'll keep it in service for any remaining venue dates that have it booked. But I'm going to start the surplus supply disposal process to remove that asset from our inventory. The costs of maintaining it through repairs have jumped. Some of these repairs are just because it's a 2012, I believe, Bluebird. Those funds could be better used towards procuring another bus. I did mention it when we put the bus contract out, and that's why we structured the athletic field trip and other bus run expenses to be increased for this upcoming contract because of our likelihood of needing to dispose of this bus. Obviously, if the district should choose to find another bus and replace it, we have the funds in our revolving accounts for transportation to immediately replace that bus. The goal of the special ed transportation revolving account and the bus fees revolving account is to maintain a stable balance so that we can procure a bus without having to, put it in a capital article. Like I was mentioning earlier, we've got about $150,000 in special ed transportation, which is a very stable high number. A bus would cost about $110,000, and it's reasonable to assume, based off of the fair market value of that bus that we're trying to dispose of, you might bring in about $30,000 from the vehicle just being sold on Municipid. And obviously, we partner with the town on that and utilize their process. So we have more than enough funds to not only purchase a bus out of that revolving account and to have remaining funds, but we've also started to have next year's special ed transportation contract signed, so there's guaranteed revenue coming in as well. Buses tend to last right around this length, the 2012 to 2024, 2025 school year. It's seen its useful life. As far as depreciating the asset, it's almost fully depreciated if I were to put a depreciation schedule out there. procuring a new bus, obviously, since we've intended to keep transportation in-house, it helps reduce costs in areas and has money remaining in the athletic transportation line of the general operating budget. So I just wanted to make the committee aware that, it's leaning in that direction. Should the next bus inspection fail done by the state, the last one came in at a very high number, close to $12,000 to repair the bus. And if it's only, the fair market value being at $30,000 roughly, do you want to continue to pump roughly that into it every year to keep it running? Or do you invest in a new asset and try to make use of that? So it's something that's on our radar. In the coming months, we're going to be examining it more.
Something to consider is when you get hit with moments like that, I would hope you'd also look at, is a full-size bus, again, you get to ask the same question over again, are 2 more transits better than a full-size, or whatever the combination?
No, we definitely want to explore all opportunities for vehicle procurement. I know the state's got a big initiative for electric buses. Right now, I would say probably not, but we definitely want to explore all avenues to make sure that that is the right choice. So short buses, Ford Transits, larger buses, making sure that it might have a wheelchair ramp on the back of it so you can have multi-use from it. Those are all things that we want to consider.
And this bus is used mostly for athletics, or?
Athletics and field trips are its primary use as of right now. It does not subsidize a regular bus run if that's that actually isn't allowed under the current contract. We can do field trips, we can do athletics, we can book it out for venues. The town might use it for Memorial Day parades or for trunk or treat in the fall. That's all allowed, but we can't subsidize that for a regular bus run.
Thank you. Are there any new grants and donations we need to?
There is one grant.
Okay, before you say that, then can I get a motion?
I make a motion to approve accepting the grants donations as presented.
Second?
Okay, person seconded.
So this is the grant that Jessica Burke, our special ed director, spoke of earlier. It is in about $75,000 from the state to reduce the use of timeout rooms, or to sorry, I'm not going to do it justice, Jessica, so you might have to speak to it in more detail. But the district was awarded $75,000 for that.
Thank you. I think, at least for me personally, I think I got more than enough info earlier that I don't need to harass you, Harrison, with questions you might not know the answer to anyways about it. But anyone else before we take it up for a vote to accept the grant?
Again, appreciate all the effort going into getting the grant. Thank you.
Yeah. And I know, Paul, you mentioned this, but it is a competitive grant. So thank you this isn't just some grant that we're accepting that the state handed out to every district who applied. So thank you for your hard work on the competitive grants. Certainly are the edge to keeping our budget over. So thank you. All right. In that case, we will take a roll call vote to accept this grant.
Darling, aye.
Jerome, aye.
Gibbons, aye.
Brennan, aye.
Edwards, aye.
Passes 5-0. Thank you. Okay. Thank you. Moving on then to facilities and operations. I just put on here about the date and venue and agenda items for a retreat. As everyone on this committee and probably most people in town are aware, elections are coming up. There are 2 of our seats open, so the committee could change before that retreat. But I just want everyone to start thinking about when you're available. I know Di sent out a schedule, so please mark that and indicate that. If there are new members elected, we'll obviously include you and take those who aren't reelected off. But then just start thinking about the agenda items. That way at the next meeting after we reorg, we can certainly start to add those and put those all together. Okay. Caitlin, did you have any superintendent reports info you wanted to give us? Okay.
It'll be quick.
Always.
So the first thing that I just wanted to make you aware of, if you aren't already, is that we are currently undergoing an EL audit. So they are auditing our EL program and how we deliver services to our English language learners. That is being worked on by our EL coordinator for the district and our 2 EL teachers. and I will submit that to the state with the coordinator on May 31st, 2024. Once we get the results back from that, if there are findings from the audit, there is the possibility that an action plan could be put in place, but we will cross that bridge when we get the results back. Assessment, just to keep you updated, we are closing out our MCAS assessment window. So the elementary school, the middle school, and the high school have all been administering MCAS since March. All MCAS assessments need to be completed by Friday. That includes makeups. So anyone listening, if you have kids that have been absent, please make sure they are in school this week, because if they do not take all of the sessions by Friday, they will not get scores, and then that will be reflected in the scores that are then sent to the district for our overall achievement on the assessments. The Simonian Center and the elementary school are also currently doing more assessments. We are doing the Dibble screener, which I briefly referred to when I was talking about the Student Opportunity Act. So that is something that is now required by state law to be administered to every student in K to 3 times a year, and we must report to parents the results 2 times a year. So anyone that is flagged in the red for their composite score, they will receive a letter before the end of school with their child's score and whatever intervention plan is in place. For our facilities manager, it is a increasingly important position, and Matt Murphy, our facilities manager, has resigned. His last day of work will be Saturday, June 22nd. So Harrison's office this morning posted that position, and we will be looking to spin up an interview team for that. It's a pretty big job because they're responsible for maintaining and improving the physical plant, grounds, and all equipments, and then also managing all of our custodial staff and our grounds crew. So we will be looking to fill that position as soon as possible. And then I just wanted to briefly touch on health and wellness. I know this was a topic at the last school committee meeting as to whether or not the town has a health committee. So there has been some misinformation and miscommunications. The town does not have a health committee. The town has a wellness committee, and the wellness committee is in charge of policy and making recommendations around district-wide practices to submit to the school committee that focus on healthy foods, exercise, and access to fresh air and playtime. That being said, we should consider launching a health committee as we begin to dive into the new standards that are coming down from DESE effective July 1, 2024. I reached out to all of the local superintendents in the Blackstone Valley to gather some information as to where the superintendents stood in how we are going to roll out those standards. The principals, the school committee, and some of our PE and health teachers were told that the Blackstone Valley was going to roll out those standards in a consistent manner and that that was being worked on. After speaking with a few superintendents, it has become clear to me that that is not the case. So we need to consider how we as Sutton want to roll out those standards next year. Initial thinking about that at the pre-K through 5 level, where I know there is a lot of conversation in the community, is that we select certain standards to roll out next year that are already embedded within our curriculum, and it might be around healthy eating practices and hygiene and things like that, and then have a committee that would launch in the fall, and that committee would then work towards determining how we're going to roll out the rest of the standards that are included in that launch. I've spoken to, like I said, a few superintendents, and the information that they gave me was that throughout the first half of the school year, superintendents did work on reviewing the standards and unpacking the expectations, but then the work was sent over to the Blackstone Valley Curriculum Consortium, which is not just superintendents, it's people from all over the Blackstone Valley that sit on that. It might be if you had an assistant superintendent. Ann Corin sat on it last year. It's my understanding that Dr. Morandi did sit in on that at times as the representative for Sutton. They tried to set up a cross-collaboration meeting for health teachers to have a presentation and training with the DESE team responsible for rolling out the standards. DESE did not and would not attend. The group worked to find a trainer for the new standards, and at that time, there was no one who was trained to be a trainer in the new health standards. The group decided at that time to hold off on doing anything collaboratively until DESE was prepared to support all of the districts. And each district made their own decision about how to proceed. One superintendent that I spoke to has decided to hold off on implementation altogether next year, and another superintendent that I spoke to actually started implementing this year. So everybody's in a different place, and I've been gathering information from all of those local superintendents as to how we should proceed. I'm sure you are all hoping for more information or a solidified plan. However, at this time, it does not appear that there is a plan in place.
But Sutton hiring a health teacher, and
That
that's.
teacher has been hired, so it's an
Okay.
internal candidate who is a grade 3 teacher, Sarah Totoni. She will be taking over as the pre-K through 5 health and wellness teacher. I really want to stress the wellness portion of that position. We are looking to really include some health teaching, like I mentioned, of just a few of the standards, but then we also want to bring in some yoga and breathe for change and some more movement with the kids, because at the pre-K through 5 level, we know how important movement is in their day.
Okay. My brain. I'm just reshuffling everybody, sorry. So,
Thanks for, I think it could go without, and we could say forever, thank you. Obviously, you weren't superintendent and you're in our interim currently, but thanks for reaching out to all the collaboratives and to the local districts and just see kind of where everyone stands. As we all know, it's a decision we'll have to make at Sutton, but ultimately it's good to know what districts around us are doing as well and what they're thinking, so.
Thanks to Matt. It's terrible news
Yeah.
for the town. He's, while he's been here, it's just been a super asset, and I wish him all the best, but,
Yes, he's fantastic, and he agreed whoever we find to fill the position that he would do his best to stay on to train them as much as he can before he moves on.
Yeah, again, yeah. Thank you, and yeah, I wanted to mention Matt as well. He's been tremendous as he's been here, and, I've enjoyed my interactions with him, and I know if it wasn't for him, I still wonder if the roof we would be no better off, and that's in itself has been a tremendous effort. So again, we'll miss him, but I wish him the best of luck, and he deserves all that going forward because he's been great. So thank you.
I'll echo that sentiment. Matt's been wonderful, and yeah, I've been devastated since I heard the news, but obviously wish him well, and and thank you for all the hats you're wearing.
For sure.
Thank you. No changes in goals or view. Obviously, as Dr. Roberts-Moran is out on FMLA leave, no changes there on her goals. No new changes necessarily on the committee's goal. Obviously, we'll need to not only identify some facility changes, but we'll need to work on hiring a new facilities director. Paul, I think you said it well about the budget. Budget is in place for this year, but we know we need to make changes before next time. So we'll certainly leave that as a key goal and something that we need to continue to work on and improve. So I think that's kind of the high-level overview of goals. Any new business anyone wanted to bring up tonight?
Yeah, I'd like to, I said it last meeting, but it was a little late. It's kind of late again, but it's all right. Just wanted to congratulate the state championship esport team, Coach Billica, and the esport team won the Mario Kart esport event at Gillette Stadium. So another state championship, which is excellent. The Sutton Drama Club earned 3 Tammy Awards for the Christmas Carol. Again, excellent presentation. Got to see the world premiere the night it opened. The internship fair this morning, again, another glowing asset of what the school does. I'd like to thank Mr. Marcucci and the staff that support that, all the businesses, the community. It's exceptional. It's so good that unfortunately I think I only got through 2 aisles because you talk to the kids and they're so enthused by it. And even if they didn't, even if what they did, they realized they didn't care for it, they still learned something valuable in that. And maybe it saves them a few bucks over the next 4 years or whatever in their life. But again, just an exceptional thing. We did see somebody there from one of the neighboring districts, and I heard a parent surprised to bump into him and like, no, you guys have run this, and we're all trying to emulate it. So it was really nice to hear that, and I think Sergio said this is the 10th or 11th year, which really, again, is exceptional. And this year in particular, we had 100% participation, all paid, which is fantastic. So really appreciate that. Jess brought it up earlier with the SPED Resource Fair tomorrow night. I think that's another great opportunity. You mentioned, Ben, elections are coming up. I really hope people get out and vote. It's very important. That's your chance to be involved and make decisions. It's not easy on any board that you serve. We don't know what the committee will look like. I want to thank both of you. Ben, the last 3 years, you've stepped up, you've contributed. It's not easy. The last year has probably been the most challenging, and you jumped in as chair, which is a tough role, so that's appreciated. Paul, 25 plus years. I'm struggling to get through like half of that. So I'm super impressed, and you do it with a level of passion and insight that is just so hugely appreciated in my time here. There's been a lot of times where we see transitions, and to have that history has been huge, and I appreciate it. It's made my work easier with folks that step up and take these roles. So we'll see how the elections go, but I just wanted to voice my appreciation for both of you. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
As usual, I will echo some of Nate's sentiments. The internship fair today was so impressive, and talking to the students and why they chose their internships was varied. And I mean, some of them were like, I've had my eye on this since freshman year. But yeah, they were all passionate, and I was excited. I went last year, and I believe I went the year before. So yeah, it's something I look forward to. Voting, yes, please vote. I talk to a lot of people, and they ask. I feel like Google sometimes, but carrying on what the town hall says, or I have a screenshot and I'll share it of town hall's post. But both of you have been a great resource. I have a lot of questions, and both of you tend to get back to me soon with your responses of how we're going to handle things or whatever, and I appreciate it. Yeah, and Paul, I mean, you've just been such an amazing resource, and we don't know how the election will play out, but we'll see. And it's been a pleasure working or being on this board with both of you. So,
Anything else?
The next meeting is going to conflict with Nate, who we know will be here. We talked about it once. Is there any ability to move that around? I just think it's important that the full board be present at the first meeting. And
Yep. I don't.
It can't hear.
sorry, what I was asking is if there's any way to move the next meeting so that the full board, whatever the board is, can be present. I think we talked about it once, but Nate knows he won't be available on the current date.
I think that Chris is looking at her planner.
When's the next scheduled one?
The 3rd.
June 3rd?
Yep.
Yes, ma'am. I think the problem with it was that obviously without knowing who else is going to be elected, it could also conflict with them. So if we set something, then it could conflict with their schedule. So that's equally not as fair.
Yeah, I for sure wouldn't do that either. So perhaps it's on the 29th.
I have
Some-
you guys for June 10th. June 3rd is, you're gonna meet twice in June? Is that it?
That might be the second, if
Yeah,
needed.
needed.
Yeah.
oh, could we move it?
You bring up a great point. If there are other members on the committee, what I'm advocating for is I think regardless, the first meeting where it's reorganization, whoever's chair, but we should schedule it when everybody can be there.
Okay. Right. Yep.
You need how many hours? 48 hours?
I usually do Wednesday or Thursday morning, yeah, the latest.
So you need 48 hours before.
Thursday morning, you have to know
So, when are you talking about?
June 3rd.
Oh, June 3rd? I thought you were just saying May.
Oh, no, at the election, the 28th.
Right.
So they would know the 29th,
Well, in theory.
in theory.
So you
Count
wanna-
Chads.
But we wouldn't
Right.
have a chair if,
I don't know what's going on.
Yeah, technically we would reorg without a chair. The superintendent fills in until a chair is made.
what works for you?
Right, no, I understand that, but
We won't meet as a committee again
Yeah.
until this occurs.
Correct.
I think it's a disservice to the community that the entire board can't be there. You raise a great point. You don't know what the composition of the board is, but I think we should leave an opening that says, whatever the composition of the board is, find a date where all 5 can be present. And you know that's not the 3rd. We know the 3rd,
I'm sorry.
Nate
Yes.
won't be there.
Do we have the ability to make a decision that says we're not meeting on a published date and move it to an unknown date?
I think it behooves to say, listen, we're going to have to move that date on the 3rd. We know that won't work, and we'll set a date.
But we have the 10th as needed,
yes.
That is a published date.
so we could omit the 3rd and say the 10th?
Yes. I think the question I'm proposing is that if, let's say Paul and I aren't on this and we have new members, then they say the 10th doesn't work, you're still running into the same issue, you're just delaying it further.
Right, and that's why I don't
That's
think
the
I
only
would
thing I'm
kick
trying
the
to say.
can. I guess I would say is, when you know the composition, the committee, whoever can schedule it at that time, should pick a date that works for the committee. I get it, you can't answer that now. What I'm looking for is a recognition that the 3rd definitely won't work, and you do it as soon as you can, or you use the 10th if that works.
Why do we set a meeting schedule, then change it?
I didn't understand, sorry.
I mean, we set a meeting schedule at the beginning of the year. This is the last meeting scheduled. I mean, everybody knew it. I mean, you know, I could be traveling on business those days. I mean,
Yep.
just what are we gonna do? I mean, we're gonna keep moving this until it's convenient for everybody, or we're gonna sit with the schedule that we set?
I'm proposing you move it to a date that's convenient for the members of the committee. Yeah, I'm suggesting the 3rd is a bad date to have a meeting.
Are you looking for, well, I guess we can't make action on it necessarily.
Well, you can. You set the schedule.
This meeting you do, the next one, who knows?
Right.
The next.
That's what I'm trying to get at, yeah.
And it's not the first time we brought this question up,
I mean,
frankly.
I apologize, but I'm personally not gonna ask the committee to move the meeting for me. I can't make it for personal reasons. So, you know, if that's the wish of the committee, sure. You know, if not, I come back and see what is.
See what is. I think the part that I truthfully get stuck on, Paul, is if there's a new committee, then we're expecting them, by publishing a date to June, that they be available. So why do we publish dates for June to begin with then? Why not just end our calendar on May? If there's going to be elections for new positions.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I don't disagree.
And it's always been that way, and I'm not trying to say it's anyone on this committee's fault. We've always published into June, but a new committee always takes place in May. So then maybe something we should be considering moving forward is that we don't choose June dates, and we let the superintendent who leads the charge until the committee is reorganized.
I think we work through a fiscal year, and that's really what it comes down to. You just July 1st to June 30th, and that's kind of how we plan it, and yeah. But it is awkward, that last meeting or two, and that's the same for every board in town.
I think that's so silly, to be honest with you. Two of us may not be here, but we set the agenda for when it occurs to begin with. I don't know, quite honestly. I think we'll have to look at that. I hate to move it. I definitely don't want Nate to miss it, but I certainly would hate to say that we're going to choose, if there are new members, a new date, and then it not work. And then what if we set one of them calls and says, oh, that doesn't work for me anymore too. I don't know.
You can still meet on June 3rd, have Caitlin chair the meeting, and then just reorg the next meeting.
Yes.
You'd have to figure out how to get around policy.
Suggestion, but I mean, you can do
But
that.
yes, the agenda would have to be pretty limited, but yes.
Well, and the policy is, I don't know that it leaves a lot of space there, and so you'd have to figure out how to change that. Policy says on the first meeting after the
Yep.
election.
Right.
I suppose you could change that, but.
Sorry.
Things happen. I certainly have missed meetings before for personal things, and that's unfortunately the way it goes. For now, I'm in favor of leaving the meeting. I think we've published a meeting schedule. I hate it, but I also just think it's unfair if there are two new members to say, this is the date you have to be here. Then if one of them calls and says, I need a different date, then that doesn't work. We've now shifted the meeting more than once. So that would be my vote.
So is this something we would vote on, or is this, we're
No.
just saying?
Chair
our-
sets the schedule.
I'm in favor of moving it to the 10th, just so we have that on the schedule as needed. It's published. The 3rd doesn't work for
It's policy, though. Yeah. But
policy.
I think I just come back to if there are two new, if Paul and I aren't here and we have two new committee members, they would be attending a June 3rd meeting, and it would still be slated for re-election because that's what our policy says. So I can say no June 3rd. Paul and I aren't on here. It's June 10th. What if that doesn't work for them? Then we're running into the exact same issue that we already had before.
I'm traveling on June 10th.
so,
Okay, so June 10th doesn't work for Bruce.
So there, if neither of us are, or if you are not on the board after the election, then the vice chair would fill the role and could schedule a date. So it's not that you can't change a date, and I'm in the same space. Bruce is definitely going to be on the board. The first meeting should be a date they can attend. My understanding is that Nate's personal trip, he isn't able to attend remotely. That on the 3rd, he is not able to attend. I think Bruce isn't able to make the 10th. If that were the date, you'd sort of have to look at it. I get it's complicated. I just think you should give real consideration to whatever the board is, whatever the 5 people are, finding a date as soon as possible that they can all participate in is appropriate.
I agree.
I mean, it's something that we can look at after elections, but I think the challenge still remains that June 3rd is a published date, and asking if there's 1 or 2 new committee members to shift more dates that aren't published, it still lends itself to a difficult position to put this board in.
And I think that anyone who's running for school committee should have made themselves aware of what those dates are as they are published for the whole year, and should be intending on being present at that meeting if they're running for that seat.
2 members of the board aren't able to make the 3rd or the 10th. It happens.
Right. I don't disagree that I don't love it. But I just think, in light of the way the policy is currently structured, that the advertised meeting is what it is right after elections, and that's when we reorg. It would be unfair to set a different date with new members.
I hear you, I don't know why, but that's, again, I'm not suggesting you wouldn't make sure all 5 members could make it.
Has this ever happened? Like,
Not that I can remember.
and if you're not present, can you be assigned a position?
You can be assigned a position, but you wouldn't be able to
Excellent.
participate in that assignment.
I'm just saying, like, if Nate's
You don't
not
have
here,
to accept
that-
your nomination, yes.
Yeah.
So
Ironically,
if we
that's-
did get together and we said we wanted Nate for one of the positions and he is unable to accept, would the meeting be over?
No. If you were to make that, if you were to make that nomination at the next meeting and it were to pass, let's say 4-0, because Nate isn't here, then that would be Nate's role. There's not.
But
a
he wouldn't be
provision.
able to accept it, you said.
So if Nate was nominated and elected as chair, there would then be a nomination election for vice chair, and the vice chair would fill while the
The
chair
seat.
isn't present.
You don't have to accept your role once the committee votes.
It's written a
the will
little
of the committee.
funny because the policy says you would, that the superintendent would preside over the nomination of the chair, and then the chair does the rest of it. I don't know how all that, but presumably you'd get through all of it and you'd
So if
have
he was
either a
voted
or
chair
a
but
vice
didn't
chair
accept
present.
it, then the vice chair then becomes the chair?
Well, no one ever has not accepted because it's not a position to accept. It's the will of the committee.
Okay.
We've never set it up like this before.
Okay.
We just, and we have an opportunity to not do that.
Yeah.
I mean, the decision doesn't have to be made tonight. I could work with the superintendent and see if there's another option, but I think that's where I land for now. So, again, ideally, yes, everyone is certainly here. And I know you don't agree with me, Paul, and that's fine. But maybe I'm just misunderstanding, but that's just the way I'm currently seeing it.
No, I completely agree with the, ideally, everybody is there. I 100% agree. It should be a date that all 5 members of the committee are present.
We can always look to moving that meeting up until Election Day. I will still hold that role, so we can always ask and inquire. Okay. Any other new business? Okay, then I'll need a motion to adjourn to executive session to discuss contract negotiations and not reconvene in open session.
So moved.
Second.
It's been first and second, and we'll need a roll call vote.
Darling, I.
Jerome, aye.
Gibbons, aye.
Brennan, aye.
Edwards, aye.
Passes 5-0. Meeting's adjourned.
Recording stopped.
Do you want,
Bruce not staying?
I'll call him.
Yeah,
Okay.
That's okay.
I just.
that would be kind of an
I
odd
was just like, oh, wait a minute, we
logistic.
got into executive session.
No,
How's that
it's
gonna
okay.
work out?
Then you don't have to